Now I'm going to show you how to create your slab mug using the slab that you just rolled out with the slab roller. So you will also have an option of two different shapes. I've got a straight up and down mug here, which the template for that one is just a straight rectangle. You also have the option of creating something that is flared like this, where it's narrower on the bottom and flares up to a wider top area. And the template for that is just on the other side of the sheet that you are given, and it's just it's a curved, it's called a truncated cone, but it's a curve here. Neither one is easier or harder to make. It's the same exact process. It's just preference for you of which shape you would like in the end. I'll use the straight up and down one. So before you roll out your slab, you will have created some sort of design on the template paper. I just did a rough kind of topographical inspired sketch design here, which I will transfer the design onto the mug after the mug has already been created. So all of the design work happens once the mug is in its shape, and that's because we don't want to stretch or manipulate the design to make it look warped. The exception is if you are doing the stamp design. For instance, this has a stamp design kind of all over it. You will want to roll out your slab and then start to texture and create a pattern using your stamps on a flat surface, and then wrap your mug, which I'll show you in a second. But the first thing I want to show you is how to prep your slab. So you've created a nice thin slab here using the slab roller. It should be long enough for your template. Take advantage of the entire slab, because remember, you will have a base to attach as well. So don't just center this into the whole area and then you don't have enough excess slab to roll your base. So I'm going to put it all the way over here and use this little extra space over here to create the bottom of my mug. But before I cut this out, what I want to do is smooth the front and the back side of this slab using a metal kidney or rib tool. It's shaped like a kidney, like your kidneys. The reason I want to do that is it compresses the surface, which makes it less likely to form cracks when you bend it, but also it gets rid of the texture that the canvas left on the surface of the slab. So when you roll the slab through the canvas slab roller, it's going to leave a nice or not so nice texture on the surface. So I'm just going to take this and hold it at an angle and smooth the surface on one side, and then flip it over and smooth the other surface. It doesn't need to be perfect because you'll do some finish work once you put your design on and stuff like that, but this will at least get the rough surface texture of the canvas out of it. So again, I'm doing both sides. It makes the slab a little bit stronger and less likely to crack, and also nice and smooth. Okay, so now that my slab is prepped, I'm going to trace my template onto the surface. I'm not going to cut all the way through just yet, and I'll show you why in a second. So I'm just going to take a pin tool and trace my template on here. Hopefully I have enough to create the base over there. And then remove it here. If I was just creating a mug with some sort of surface design that I am going to draw on and apply, then I could go ahead and cut this entire thing out and wrap it in the round. But I want to show you how to use the stamps design on this first, and I'll stamp half of it, and then also, actually maybe I'll divide it up a little bit. I'll put half of it a stamp design and half of it a nice drawn design. So I'll just divide this in two, kind of have, just gonna trace over with the pin tool lightly. It's gonna make a very light impression on the surface. I'm not going through, but it'll at least show me, you can kind of see, I'll trace a little bit here. Show me where I'm going to keep the stamp design. So I'm going to stamp underneath here. Again, this is all just for demo purposes. If you want an all-over pattern stamp or have something that's very planned out, that's completely up to you. So once you have your slab prepped here, you're just going to take your stamps. So once you have your stamps, I'll show you how to use two different ones here. This one is just an individual stamp, which you will have made prior to doing this project. It's bisque fired once, so it's not going to stick to the clay or absorb any water. And then I also have a roller stamp here, which you can roll over the surface and get a continuous stamp. So I'll just kind of probably roll the base, the bottom here, and just have a nice texture on the bottom. And what you're going to notice happening is your slab will start to distort a little bit because you're pushing on the clay. It's probably going to be not so perfectly cut anymore, but that's okay because I can still go and recut this. So I just put a texture on the bottom here, and then I'm going to take this larger stamp here, or this deeper stamp, and stamp right over it. So I've got kind of a double texture here, and this is just a star stamp that I'll randomly put throughout here. I'm pushing down hard enough so I can see it, but not so hard that I make a thin spot. So don't push with all of your might, just kind of push until the image is clear. And you can kind of see the stamp down at the bottom here. Now I'm just going to leave it like this, and I'm going to recut it, and I'll show you the other way of transferring your design on in a second. But at this point, I'm ready to cut this out. Now before I cut this out, because I've stamped and rolled some designs into it, this probably is a little bit different of a shape. So I'm going to retrace my lines here to make sure that I have a nice even slab. So I can cut off a little bit of what got pushed out at the top, and then over here on the side. And now I can go and just take my pin tool and cut this the slab out. And this construction happens in one day. You don't want to roll the slab out and then let it sit flat for a long period of time, because it's going to dry in that flat state and then be really difficult to manipulate into a circle. If you have to walk away from it a little bit, then you can always spritz it with a little bit of water, put plastic on top of it, and do what you need to do and come back to it within the same class. But you definitely don't want to leave it in the flat state in your cubby for more than a couple of hours. So now that I have my slab cut out, I'll just move the excess clay away. Still want this little piece here. And now I'm ready to form the body of my mug. So we're going to wrap the slab in a circle shape. And because the clay is super soft, I want to do this fairly quickly and just start to coax it into a round form. Now you'll see on the end here, these edges are probably not going to meet up perfectly. It might be a little weird. The cut might not be exactly the same, but don't worry about that just yet, because I'll show you a way to score and slip these two edges together so they're going to fit really nicely. I'm more concerned about making sure that it's nice and rounded before I go and attach it together. So what I'm going to do is overlap the edge of this just by about 1/4 of an inch, and then cut through the 2 slabs at an angle. So you can kind of see I've overlapped the edges here, and then I'm going to cut down through using my knife at an angle here. So you can see my knife is at an angle at all the way from top to bottom. I'm going to cut, and I'll have an excess piece of clay on the inside and an excess piece on the outside. But the seam where these 2 pieces meet up, I have one on the front, one on the back, but now the cut is exactly the same and they should match up perfectly. So now this is the seam that I would score and slip together. So I take my pin tool and score this one side and score the other side. I'm not worrying too much if I cut through any of my design. I can always kind of redo any texture stamps. If you're doing the drawn design, then you haven't applied any of the design to the surface yet, so you really haven't messed anything up. It's really just if you've started to put texture with a stamp on there, this might mess it up a little bit. So I'm going to apply the slip to one side here, and then squish this together. And now, since I don't want extra clay on the outside, I am going to put the coil to seal up the seam on the inside of the clay, of the slab mug here. So I'm just going to take a tool, smooth this seam down, supporting on the inside here with my hand, and then roll a coil just with extra clay, a really, really thin coil, just to cover that seam on the inside. So I'm just going to take something very little, put it down in and over the top here. So there's a tiny coil on the inside there, and I'm just going to take a wooden tool and smooth the coil one way and then the other way to seal up that seam. It's not going to be pretty right now. The clay is super soft, so the mug is going to change its shape, but I really just want to keep that seam still while I work on everything else on the mug, so try to seal it up as best you can. Once the mug starts to stiffen up, then I can go and take care of any lumps or ugly areas of this. But at this point, I just want to make sure that it's closed and not opening up. We'll do that. Okay. So now that the body of the mug is made, you're going to have to attach a base to it. And this is really important because that's going to keep your mug stable. If you were to leave it like this and then keep handling it, it's changing shape. It's getting, squished into an oval and moving back and forth. So the seam where you attach the 2 edges together might open up and be really annoying. And the reason it's doing that is because you don't have a base attached to it. So now I'm just going to take my extra slab here, and I would just trace the bottom, or if you want something that's perfectly rounded, if this is not round enough for you, I would find something that's roughly the same size. And with the template that I have created, the top part of these like little yogurt cups that we have by the sink, the top edge of it is a pretty perfect fit for a base. So I would just take one of these, put it on your extra slab that hopefully you have. Or if you don't, then you'll have to re-roll a piece. But cut this out and then score and slip the base to your mug. So So I would take this, score around the base, and make sure that this is done very, very thoroughly, because again, if you want to use this mug, scoring and slipping is the only way to make sure that this slab stays secured and you don't have any cracks in the base, or else you're going to get leaks, and then it won't be a functioning mug. So I'm just going to score the base of this really well and then put some slip down. And once I get to this point, I'm kind of done for the day. The clay is too soft to really manipulate and work any sort of design into the surface, especially if you have something that's more complicated. So you want to attach the slab, shape it into its final sort of rounded form, smooth out any really glaring, obvious areas that need some smoothing, and then just wrap it and let it sit until next class. So once I put some slip on there, I'm just going to line it up and squish it down. So that I can take this, I'm just going to push it down a little bit. And then same thing, I don't want extra bulk on the outside, so I'm just going to take a tool and smooth the seam so you can't see where the base was attached. And then on the inside bottom is where I'm going to put a coil. Again, if you have a stamp texture, you might mess up the stamp design a little bit, and you might need to re-roll it or kind of fudge the design, or even create a line for the bottom part of your mug, but it's not a big deal. So on the inside is where I need to put a little bit of a coil at the base to seal it up. So again, I'm going to take some extra clay, roll a coil, and it doesn't need to be big, otherwise you're just going to have a lot of extra clay to smooth. I'm going to try to size it. Now I'm just going to drop it in, sort of in the rounded shape. I'm going to drop it into the bottom and really use a nice rounded tool to push it into the inner corners. And this is probably the most difficult part, because it's hard to see what you're doing in the bottom, and also it's hard to get your hand in there. So that's why I'm using a tool and just finding a tool that has a nice rounded tip to it. So a lot of the wooden tools have a good rounded tip that you can just go and smooth the inner corner. So I'm going to hold my hand on the outside so I don't mess up the shape as I push on the inside. I don't want like a big flared bottom to this. So if I keep supporting the clay from the outside, I can be pretty aggressive with my smoothing on the inside. Again, this is going to be kind of ugly at this point. But as this stiffens up, I can go ahead with a sponge, or even again with a tool, and really scrape down any lumpy areas on the inside. But I just want to get this attached today and let it dry or stiffen up till next class. Okay. So at this point I would be done with the first step of making the mug. The next step would be applying the design to the outside, and I'll show you how to do that once this has stiffened up.